Jason stepped into the sweltering subway car, his shoulders heavy with the fatigue of a 12-hour shift at the construction site. His boots were caked in dried mud, his neon vest stained with a mixture of sweat and concrete dust. He leaned against the metal pole, gripping it as the train lurched forward, shaking his body like a rag doll. His mind wandered to his mother's anniversary dinner, a rare moment for his family to gather, and he reminded himself to stay awake long enough to make it meaningful. The train screeched into the next station. As the doors hissed open, a wave of bodies surged inside. Jason shifted his weight, making room for a middle-aged man carrying a bulging briefcase. Amid the sea of faces, his attention snagged on a pregnant woman standing a few feet away. She looked out of place in the chaotic shuffle, her hand braced protectively over her swollen belly. Her hair clung to her damp forehead, her eyes sunken with exhaustion. Jason hesitated, instinctively glancing at the empty seat he occupied. The woman's face was tight, her lips pressed into a thin line, as if summoning every ounce of strength to remain upright. Without a second thought, Jason stood and gestured toward the seat. "Here," he said simply, his voice gruff but kind. "Thank you," the woman murmured, her voice barely audible over the din. She lowered herself gingerly, wincing as the train jolted forward. Jason gripped the overhead bar, standing over her like a shield, aware of the subtle discomfort his towering frame often caused strangers. He offered a quick smile, hoping to set her at ease, but her eyes were glued to the ground. The moment settled into the rhythm of the train's rattling hum. But then, tension thickened the air. At the next stop, an older man entered the train, his face wrinkled with disdain as his gaze flicked toward Jason. The man muttered something under his breath, loud enough to be heard yet incomprehensible. Jason caught the sharp glint of judgment in his eyes and felt a pang of defensiveness. He tried to ignore it, his grip tightening on the bar above. "People these days," the man said louder now, his voice tinged with an unplaceable venom. His words were directed at no one, but aimed at Jason all the same. Jason's jaw clenched. He recognized this tone, a whisper of superiority, a passive-aggressive jab that refused to land fully. He met the man's glare, a wordless challenge flickering between them, but said nothing. He could feel other eyes on him now, passengers quietly observing the exchange, some glancing away when his gaze swept over them. The woman in the seat shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between Jason and the older man. "He was just being kind," she said softly, her words breaking the uneasy silence. Her voice quavered, as though unused to speaking up. The man snorted dismissively. "Kindness," he drawled. "Funny how selective people can be about when they show it." Jason's fists curled at his sides, his nails biting into his palms. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, anger coiling tight and venomous. This wasn't the first time he'd been the target of unprovoked hostility, but something about it today, a day meant to celebrate family and love, hit a nerve. "I don't want any trouble," Jason said finally, his voice measured, though a simmering edge lay beneath. He glanced toward the pregnant woman, whose face was pale and uneasy. "I was just giving her my seat. That's it." The older man scoffed but fell silent. Jason exhaled, the tension easing just slightly. But the moment of relief was short-lived. Two younger passengers, a man and a woman, who had been whispering to each other in the corner of the car, suddenly stepped forward. The man, dressed in a crisp business suit, smirked as he addressed Jason. "Real chivalrous of you," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Not trying to get her number, are you?" The woman beside him laughed, covering her mouth with her hand as if to stifle her amusement. The sound of it was like nails on a chalkboard to Jason. His neck flushed with embarrassment, but he stood his ground, his broad shoulders squared. "That's enough," Jason said, his voice firm but calm. His eyes met the woman's, then the man's. "This isn't a joke. She needed the seat. End of story." "Oh, relax," the woman said, rolling her eyes. "It's just a little fun. No need to get all worked up." Jason felt the weight of every eye on the train now, the suffocating pressure of judgment and amusement at his expense. He scanned the car, searching for an ally, but no one intervened. A man in the corner adjusted his tie awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. A teenager with headphones stared blankly out the window, indifferent to the unfolding drama. And then the pregnant woman spoke again, her voice stronger this time. "He didn't do anything wrong," she said, her tone firm. She looked at the man and woman directly, her gaze unwavering. "He showed kindness. The least you could do is leave him alone." Jason felt a pang of gratitude toward her, a warmth that cut through the cold hostility surrounding them. The man in the suit opened his mouth to retort but stopped short when the woman's glare hardened. He muttered something inaudible and turned away. The rest of the ride passed in tense silence. Jason stayed standing, his body rigid, his face a mask of composure. When the train finally screeched into his stop, he nodded briefly to the woman in the seat. "Take care," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you," she replied, her voice filled with a sincerity that eased some of the weight pressing on him. Jason stepped off the train, the rush of the platform's cool air washing over him like a balm. As he climbed the stairs toward the street, the city's cacophony enveloped him. But in the back of his mind, the voices from the subway lingered, a bitter reminder of how easily kindness could be twisted into something ugly. The train jolted to a halt, throwing passengers slightly off balance. Jason steadied himself against the metal pole, his eyes instinctively scanning the crowd. That's when he noticed Kelly, the pregnant woman he'd given his seat to, swaying unsteadily. Her face had turned an alarming shade of pale, beads of sweat gathering on her brow. "Hey," Jason said, his voice low but urgent. "Are you okay?" Before she could answer, Kelly's eyes rolled back, and she crumpled forward, her body limp. Her bag slipped from her lap, spilling its contents onto the grimy subway floor. The scene erupted into chaos. "Help her!" a woman shouted from the far end of the car, her voice rising above the startled gasps. Passengers shuffled nervously, craning their necks to see but hesitant to act. Jason's instincts kicked in. He crouched beside Kelly, his large hands trembling as he gently propped her up. "Someone call 911. Jason barked, his voice commanding but tinged with desperation. He checked her pulse, his construction-calloused fingers fumbling against her neck. It was there, weak but steady. Relief barely registered before another voice cut through the commotion. "What the hell is he doing?" a man snapped. Jason turned to see the same older man who had eyed him earlier with disdain. Now, his face was twisted with suspicion. "You touching her like that for?" "Back off, man." Jason froze, stunned by the accusation. "She fainted," he said, his voice measured, though he could feel anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'm trying to help." But the words seemed to fuel the man's indignation. "Trying to help?" he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think we're stupid? Look at her bag." He was probably trying to grab something. Jason's stomach twisted as more eyes turned toward him, narrowing with suspicion. "What?" he said, his tone incredulous. "Are you serious?" "Yeah, I'm serious," the man shot back. "First you're playing the hero, giving her your seat. Now this? What kind of game are you running?" "Calm down," someone shouted, but it was drowned out by the rising tension. "She fainted," Jason repeated, his voice rising as frustration bubbled over. He gestured to Kelly, who was beginning to stir, her eyes fluttering open. "Ask her yourself." Kelly's weak voice broke through the chaos. "It's him," she mumbled, her words slurred as she pointed a trembling finger in Jason's direction. The accusation hit Jason like a punch to the gut. He stared at her, confusion and hurt flickering across his face. "What?" he said softly, disbelief lacing his tone. "No, I helped you." The murmurs in the subway car grew louder, the crowd feeding off the tension. A woman in a business suit clutched her purse tighter, inching away. "I knew something was off about him," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Jason to hear. He glanced around, realizing how quickly the narrative was spinning out of control. "Stop it," Kelly said suddenly, her voice stronger now, though her face was still ashen. "I meant, he's the one who helped me." The words didn't come fast enough. A man in a suit had already stepped forward, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the cops," he declared. "We'll let them sort this out." Jason's chest tightened. You don't need to do that, he said, holding his hands up. I didn't do anything wrong. Then why's she pointing at you? The man retorted, his eyes narrowing. Why don't you tell us? I don't know. Jason's voice cracked with frustration. Maybe because I'm the only one who gave a damn about helping her? The older man from earlier stepped closer, his face a mask of hostility. Or maybe it's because you were trying to take advantage. Guys like you. Always looking for an angle. Jason's fists clenched at his sides. He knew what guys like you meant. He'd heard it before, too many times to count. He wanted to shout, to lash out, but he forced himself to breathe, to stay calm. The air in the subway car felt suffocating. Kelly, now sitting upright with Jason's support, grabbed his arm weakly. No, she said, her voice shaking but insistent. He helped me. I just wasn't feeling well. The murmurs in the crowd grew quieter, but the suspicion lingered. The man with the phone hesitated, lowering it slightly. You sure about that? He asked Kelly, his tone still dubious. Yes. Kelly snapped, her sudden burst of energy startling everyone. She turned to Jason, her eyes filled with something that looked like shame. I'm sorry, she whispered. Jason didn't respond. He couldn't. His throat felt tight, and the weight of the accusations still hung heavy in the air. The pregnant woman's words had cleared him, but the damage was done. He could feel it in the way people avoided his gaze, in the space they kept between themselves and him. The train screeched into the next station, and the doors slid open with a hiss. Jason stood, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't want to give anyone another reason to doubt him. He looked at Kelly one last time, her face etched with gratitude and regret, before stepping off the train. The cool air of the platform hit him, but it didn't feel refreshing. It felt hollow, like the pit in his stomach that wouldn't go away. He walked toward the exit, his head low, his mind replaying the scene over and over. The voices, the accusations, the humiliation. They clung to him like the dust and grime of the construction site. No matter how much he tried to shake it off, he knew it would stay with him. The echoes of judgment were loud, drowning out the quiet truth of what had really happened. As Jason emerged onto the crowded city street, the noise of traffic and life enveloped him. But for the first time in a long time, it offered no comfort. He was a stranger here, just as he had been on that subway car. And for the first time, Jason wasn't sure where he belonged. The subway car was heavy with tension, a volatile mix of fear and suspicion coursing through the air. Jason stood near the door, frozen in place, his hands raised slightly as if surrendering to the judgmental stares boring into him. Kelly, pale and visibly shaken, leaned against the seat, clutching her stomach. Despite her earlier words exonerating him, the damage had already taken root. A young man wearing a hoodie and earbuds yanked them out dramatically. I saw it, he blurted, pointing at Jason. This guy was standing way too close to her, like, way too close. Jason's head snapped toward him. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice sharp with disbelief. I gave her my seat. The young man, Tom, shrugged but took a step back, as though Jason's proximity itself was dangerous. I don't know, man. Looked sketchy to me. I mean, she's pregnant, right? What if he, did something to her? Jason felt his chest tighten as murmurs rippled through the passengers like a gathering storm. A woman clutching a shopping bag gasped audibly. Oh my God, did he poison her? She whispered to the man beside her, who nodded grimly. No, Jason barked, his voice cracking under the strain. His frustration was raw now, his anger barely contained. Are you serious? Poison her? I just helped her when no one else would. The older man from earlier, his face twisted into a permanent scowl, took a step closer. Funny how the guy always defending himself is the one who's guilty, he sneered. Why don't you empty your pockets, huh? What's in them? Jason's fists clenched so tightly his knuckles ached. He wanted to shout, to demand they stop and think rationally, but every glance thrown his way was another verdict, another silent condemnation. The subway car was closing in on him. Kelly, struggling to lift her head, tried to intervene. No, she's probably scared. Another passenger interrupted. It was the woman in the business suit, Her lips pursed as though tasting something bitter. He was all over her, and now look. She's fainted. Could be drugs or God knows what. Jason couldn't believe what he was hearing. Drugs? He repeated, his voice rising in disbelief. You're insane. She fainted because she's tired and Hey, stop yelling. Another passenger snapped, a burly man in a baseball cap. Why you getting so defensive, huh? You're making it worse for yourself. Jason's breathing grew shallow, the weight of their accusations pressing down on him like a lead blanket. He scanned the car desperately, looking for any sign of support, but found none. Even Kelly's earlier defense seemed to be forgotten in the growing tide of suspicion. Tom crossed his arms, emboldened by the crowd's reaction. I don't know, man, he said, shaking his head. Something about this just feels off. Why were you so close to her, huh? Could have been trying to grab her stuff when she wasn't looking. Jason's face burned with humiliation. Her stuff spilled because she fainted, he said through gritted teeth. I didn't touch anything. Oh yeah. Tom shot back. Then why'd she point at you when she woke up? She was trying to explain. Jason shouted, his voice cracking as it echoed in the cramped car. She was saying I helped her. The baseball cap man snorted. Sure she was. Why don't you stay put until the cops show up? Let them sort it out. The mention of the police sent a jolt through Jason. His mind raced. He couldn't afford to have the cops involved, not with the way things were spiraling. He knew how this would look. A young black man standing over a vulnerable white woman while a crowd of witnesses twisted the story with every glance and word. Come on, guys, Kelly said weakly, her voice trembling. He didn't do anything. But her words were drowned out by the chorus of doubt that had already taken root. He's acting all cagey, someone muttered. Yeah, look at him, another added. Why's he sweating so much? Jason's jaw tightened. He could feel the spotlight of judgment on him, every bead of sweat and twitch of his muscles magnified under their collective gaze. He opened his mouth to defend himself again, but the words stuck in his throat. No matter what he said, they'd already decided. A teenage girl in the corner, clutching her phone tightly, snapped a picture. Jason noticed the flash and felt his stomach lurch. What are you doing? He demanded, stepping toward her. She flinched, holding the phone tighter. I'm just, in case something happens, she stammered. Jason turned away, disgusted. Something already happened, he muttered under his breath. None of you did anything when she needed help. What's that supposed to mean? The older man barked, stepping forward again. You saying it's our fault? Real convenient for you to blame everyone else when you're the one looking shady. Jason took a step back, raising his hands. I'm not blaming anyone, he said, though his voice betrayed the anger simmering beneath. I can't believe how fast you all turned on me. Kelly tried again, her voice stronger this time. Stop it, she said, glaring at the crowd. He didn't do anything wrong. He gave me his seat and tried to help me when I fainted. That's it. The subway car fell into a momentary silence, Kelly's words hanging in the air. But the damage had been done. Even with her defense, Jason could feel the lingering doubt in their stares, the way they avoided his gaze but kept their distance, as though he carried some unseen threat. The train screeched into the next station, the doors sliding open with a hiss. Jason didn't wait for anyone to say anything else. He stepped off the train, his shoulders hunched and his head low, the cool air of the platform doing little to soothe the burn of humiliation crawling under his skin. As he climbed the stairs to the street above, he could still hear their murmurs, the sharp edges of their accusations slicing into him. The weight of their suspicion followed him, a shadow he couldn't shake, a reminder of how quickly kindness could be twisted into something sinister. By the time Jason reached the surface, the city's noise enveloped him, but it wasn't enough to drown out the voices in his head. The blaring wail of a police siren echoed down the subway platform as two officers pushed their way through the curious crowd gathering at the station. Jason stood to the side, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, his heart thundering against his ribcage. The scene had escalated far beyond what he could have imagined. He had stepped in to help, and now he was being treated like a criminal. The officers, one a grizzled man in his 40s and the other a younger woman with sharp eyes, approached the subway car. The older cop, Officer Grayson, glanced around at the murmuring group of passengers. "What's going on here?" he barked. "It's him," someone said quickly, pointing at Jason. He was acting real suspicious. Jason stiffened, clenching his fists at his sides. "I didn't do anything wrong," he protested, his voice louder than he intended. The younger officer, whose badge read Martinez, raised a hand. "Calm down, sir. We're going to get to the bottom of this." Before Jason could respond, a petite woman with a bob haircut and a determined expression stepped forward. "I saw him," she said firmly, her finger trembling as she pointed at Jason. "He was near her bag. He picked something up. I saw it." Jason's stomach dropped. "No," he said quickly, shaking his head. "I was just trying to help. Her stuff fell out when she fainted. I didn't take anything." Laura, the woman, crossed her arms. "Why were you so close to her in the first place? Nobody else was standing that close. It looked like you were digging through her things." The murmurs among the passengers started up again, a sinister hum of doubt and accusation. Jason felt the walls closing in, the stairs burning into him like the harsh fluorescent lights overhead. Officer Grayson turned to Kelly, who was now sitting on a bench, still pale but more alert. "Ma'am," he said in a steady tone, "can you tell us what happened?" Kelly hesitated, her eyes flicking to Jason. "He helped me," she said softly. "I fainted, and he was the only one who came to help." Jason felt a flicker of hope, but it was short-lived. Laura scoffed loudly. "Help? Maybe. Or maybe he was helping himself." She fainted, and that's when he saw his chance. "I didn't take anything," Jason shouted, his voice raw with frustration. "Check her bag, check my pockets, whatever you need to do. I didn't touch her stuff." The outburst made the officers pause. Martinez studied Jason carefully, her expression unreadable. "Sir," she said, her tone firmer now, "calm down. We'll figure this out." Grayson moved closer to Kelly. "Do you remember him touching your bag?" he asked. Kelly looked down, biting her lip. I don't know," she admitted. "I wasn't really aware of what was happening." Jason's chest tightened. Her uncertainty, though understandable, felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He looked to her for some sign of reassurance, but her eyes wouldn't meet his. "I saw him near it," Laura pressed. "I mean, isn't that enough? And why is he acting so defensive if he's innocent?" Jason spun toward her, his face flushed with anger. "Because you're accusing me of something I didn't do," he snapped. "What am I supposed to do? Just stand here and let you all pin this on me?" Grayson stepped between them, his presence imposing. "That's enough," he said sharply. He turned to Jason. "Sir, let's make this simple. Do you have anything on you that doesn't belong to you?" "No," Jason said, his voice trembling with indignation. He shoved his hands into his pockets, turning them out to show they were empty. "See? Nothing." Martinez gestured to Kelly's bag, still on the floor where someone had hastily shoved it aside. "Ma'am," she said to Kelly, "would you mind checking your belongings to see if anything is missing?" Kelly nodded hesitantly, leaning forward to reach for the bag. Her hands shook as she opened it, pulling out a wallet, keys, and a crumpled receipt. After a moment, she looked up and shook her head. "Everything's here," she said softly. Jason exhaled sharply, relief flooding his chest. "See?" he said, looking around at the crowd. "I told you." But the atmosphere remained tense. Laura didn't back down, her face pinched with distrust. "Just because she has everything now doesn't mean he didn't mess with her stuff," she argued. "Maybe he put it back when he realized people were watching." "Are you serious?" Jason said, his voice rising again. "Do you even hear yourself? I didn't touch her stuff, and I sure as hell didn't take anything." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. The baseball cap man muttered, "Why is he getting so worked up if he's innocent?" "Because you're all treating me like a damn thief." Jason shot back, his voice cracking under the weight of his frustration and humiliation. "All I did was help her, and this is what I get?" Grayson held up a hand. "That's enough," he said. "Sir, we need you to stay calm." Jason's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to nod. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "But I didn't do anything wrong." Martinez crouched near Kelly. Ma'am, are you sure you're feeling okay? Do you think you fainted because of something you ate or drank? Kelly shook her head slowly. No, I was just tired. That's all. Laura wasn't satisfied. Maybe she doesn't know what happened, she insisted. Maybe he... Enough, Grayson interrupted, his voice sharp. He turned to Jason. Sir, we're going to need you to stay here while we take statements. Jason's heart sank. What? Why? He demanded. To clear this up, Grayson said simply. You're not under arrest, but we need to be thorough. Jason wanted to argue, to shout that this was all ridiculous, but he knew it wouldn't matter. The damage was already done. As the officers began questioning the passengers, Jason stood alone, the weight of their stares pressing down on him. He had tried to do the right thing, and now he was the one being judged. The city's noise faded into the background, leaving only the bitter taste of humiliation and the cold realization that kindness didn't always pay off. Jason stood in stunned silence as Officer Grayson frowned, holding up a small glass vial of clear liquid that he had just pulled from Jason's jacket pocket. The glint of the vial under the harsh subway lights made Jason's stomach churn. What's this, then? Grayson asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. The crowd around them grew quiet, their earlier murmurs replaced with tense anticipation. Jason blinked, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. I don't know, he stammered. That's not mine. I've never seen that before. The officer's eyes narrowed. It was in your pocket. I swear I don't know how it got there. Jason's voice cracked, his hands trembling. His heart pounded in his chest as the situation spiraled further out of control. He had gone from being accused of theft to something far worse, though he still couldn't fully grasp what was happening. Laura's sharp voice cut through the tension. See? I told you he was up to something. She crossed her arms, looking vindicated as she glared at Jason. What kind of person carries around random vials of liquid? He was probably planning to use it on her. That's ridiculous, Jason shouted, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. I didn't even touch her bag, let alone put something in my pocket. This is a setup. Officer Martinez examined the vial, her expression cautious but neutral. Grayson, she said, her tone measured. We need to figure out what this is and how it got on him before we jump to conclusions. Grayson gave her a curt nod, though his skeptical gaze remained fixed on Jason. We'll get it analyzed, but for now, he's staying put. Jason's chest heaved as he struggled to calm himself. You don't believe me, do you? He asked, his voice low but trembling with emotion. I've been saying I didn't do anything from the start, but none of you even care. Before the officers could respond, a timid voice broke through the crowd. Wait, the teenager, Emily, said hesitantly, clutching her phone. I think I might have something that proves he's telling the truth. All eyes turned to Emily as she stepped forward, her hands shaking as she unlocked her phone. I was recording when everything happened, she explained, avoiding Jason's gaze. I thought it might be important. Martinez gestured for her to hand over the phone. Let me see that. Emily hesitated, then passed the phone to the officer, who began playing the video. The footage showed Kelly standing before collapsing suddenly, her bag spilling onto the floor. Jason's figure appeared in the frame, leaning down to pick something up near her bag, but he never touched the bag or its contents. The video also clearly captured Kelly's hand slipping into her coat pocket, where the vial had likely been. The tension in the air shifted as the truth began to unfold. Martinez handed the phone to Grayson, who watched the video with a furrowed brow. Finally, he looked at Jason and sighed. This video clears you of touching her belongings, he said, though his tone wasn't apologetic. Jason exhaled sharply, but his relief was short-lived. His gaze turned to Kelly, who was pale and fidgeting in her seat. Then where did the vial come from? Jason asked pointedly, his voice hard. Martinez turned to Kelly. Ma'am, do you recognize this? She asked, holding up the vial. Kelly froze, her lips trembling as she avoided eye contact. I don't know what you're talking about, she said unconvincingly. Jason stepped forward, his voice rising with frustration. She put it in my pocket, didn't she? You saw the video. She's the one who dropped it. Grayson frowned at Kelly, whose unease was becoming impossible to ignore. "Ma'am," he said, his tone sharp, "I suggest you start telling us the truth." Kelly's composure cracked. She buried her face in her hands and let out a shaky sob. Okay, she admitted. "It's mine. The vial is mine." The crowd gasped audibly, and Jason felt both vindicated and enraged. "You framed me," he shouted, his voice echoing off the subway walls. "Why? What did I ever do to you?" Kelly shook her head, her words tumbling out in a rush. "I didn't mean to. I panicked. When I fainted, I thought someone might find it and think it was mine, and I didn't know what else to do." Grayson's expression hardened. "What's in the vial, Kelly?" Kelly hesitated, her shoulders trembling. "It's not dangerous," she said quickly. "It's just something I've been keeping for my protection." Martinez's eyebrows lifted. "Protection from what?" Kelly glanced nervously at the crowd. "From someone who's been after me," she admitted. "My ex. He's dangerous. I've been trying to hide from him." The officers exchanged a look, but Grayson didn't lower the vial. "You need to come clean about everything," he said. "If this has anything to do with a crime, we need to know." Kelly nodded tearfully, her voice breaking as she spoke. "I've been running for months. I've done some things I'm not proud of, fraud, mostly, but I was desperate. My ex has been threatening me, and I thought I could just disappear." The crowd's earlier hostility shifted to unease. Jason, however, felt no sympathy. He glared at Kelly, his hands clenched into fists. "You were willing to ruin my life to cover your own mess," he said coldly. "You let them think I was some kind of criminal." Kelly met his gaze, her eyes full of regret. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." Grayson sighed and gestured for Kelly to stand. "You're coming with us," he said. "We'll need to sort this out at the station." As Kelly was escorted away, Martinez turned to Jason. "You're free to go," she said quietly. "The evidence clears you." But Jason didn't feel free. He felt exhausted and angry, his trust in people shattered. He walked out of the station, his mind spinning with everything that had happened. A few days later, Jason sat in his apartment, the events of that night still weighing heavily on him. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. When he opened it, Kelly stood there, looking fragile but determined. "I needed to see you," she said softly. "To apologize." Jason crossed his arms, his expression stony. "What do you want?" Kelly hesitated, then said, "Thank you for helping me, even after everything. I was scared, and I made a horrible mistake. I needed you to know I'm sorry." Jason stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine. Apology accepted. But don't expect me to forget." As Kelly turned to leave, Jason shut the door, feeling no satisfaction. The world had been quick to assume the worst of him, and that was something he couldn't easily forgive or forget.